Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the SAM Society. My name is Lia Genovese and I am a member of the lecture committee. The SAM Society, under royal patronage, organizes a wide variety of lectures with topics ranging from art history, religious studies, geography, architecture, languages, anthropology, archaeology, and so on. The areas covered encompass Southeast Asia, but also other regions. Tonight's presentation will indeed take us west of here, to Russia, to be precise. We have already finalized talks for May, June, and July, and several others are being coordinated well into the summer. And while I'm here, I might also tell you that on Saturday, the 7th of June, at 2 p.m. in this room, there is going to be a presentation about the recent earthquake that affected Myanmar and Thailand. And it's by an expert who works for the AIT in Thailand, so I hope you can make it. And now to tonight's presentation, Monument versus Dilapidation, by Dr. Dmitry Timoshkin. This is the second talk in the space of 4 months related to conservation and all its attendant considerations. On the 6th of February, Mr. Graham Bristol talked about the demise of Pom Mahakan and the cultural rights attached to its demolition. Although tonight Ajahn Dmitry will take us well to the west of Bangkok, the perennial dilemma of conservation versus demolition, preserve or innovate, cherish or tear down, is ever present in all corners of the world. Tonight, Dr. Timoshkin will reprise this topic with a presentation centered on post-Soviet Siberian cities. Ajahn Dmitry currently works as a visiting expert at the Faculty of Sociology and Anthropology at Thammasat University in Bangkok. He also teaches at the Department of Digital Technologies in Creative Industries at Siberian Federal University in Krasnoyarsk and conducts research on marginalized groups in post-socialist Siberian cities at the Center for Theoretical and Applied Political Science at the Russian Presidential Academy of National Economy and Public Administration in Moscow. Dr. Timoshkin's presentation will last around 45 minutes and will be followed by a Q&A. So I hope you're preparing your questions for what is a very, very interesting presentation. So on behalf of the SAM Society, welcome Dr. Dmitry Timoshkin.
Dear colleagues, good evening. I'm truly glad to see you all here, and thank you for coming. And thanks. And thank you so much for having me here. Thanks to our hosts. So first, a little quick disclaimer. I have very little experience in public talk in English. So I will rely on cheat sheet like a 100-year-old General Secretary of Communist Party. Please don't judge me too harsh for that. First, let me begin with a brief introduction to the cities where these events are happening. Let me begin with Irkutsk. It is a city of 600,000 people located near the Lake Baikal, the largest lake in the world. The center of Irkutsk was included in the preliminary list of UNESCO cultural heritage sites. A large part of the central area remained unchanged since the early 20th century and consists of old wooden houses with land plots. Second city is industrial Krasnoyarsk with a population of over 1 million. It lies a bit further west. There, many areas in the city center are still made up of wooden old houses. And in this lecture, I'll speak about these kinds of districts, low-rise, old areas located near the city, downtown. And redevelopment campaigns in the cities often begin with a discussion about a significant past. That discussion is typically triggered by the local urban political regime, which is an informal alliance between developers, municipal officials, and security agencies. Almost every new redevelopment project here relies on either the rejection or the affirmation of one of three periods that are now very important and central to Russian collective memory. The pre-revolutionary Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and post-Soviet Russia. So why does history become a trigger that pushes city spaces into uncertainty, into chaos? And to answer that, we need to briefly discuss the Soviet period in the history of Siberian cities. The Soviet city was planned as a rational space. Every building and every person had a specific function, and each function had an ideological justification. At the center of this vision stood a massive factory covered with smoke, a symbol of joy for the small parts of the mechanism, the proletarians. Both the city and the human being were imagined as a parts of a single machine designed to bring the country into the bright utopian future. And this narrative described many of the city social and spatial structures as temporary, and at the same time strictly limiting the possible ways that could be changed. All of this existed within the framework of a denied past labeled as pre-revolutionary and dark. Spaces and communities associated with this dark past were marginalized, and they were excluded from the new ideological narrative and faced actually just two options: radical transformation or destruction. Places were stripped of their old pasts and given new ones aligned with the myth of the new Soviet state. For example, a pre-revolutionary merchant's house could become a dormitory, a factory club, or a kindergarten. A church could be converted into a ski rental station or a vegetable storage facility. And one of the key marginal zones in the Soviet city was so-called private sector. It's a Russian term, it's used in Russian city anthropology, and it refers to areas of low-rise wooden old houses with adjoining garden sites. And this type of housing represents two things that Soviet authorities deeply disliked. The first is private property, especially in the form of small sites of land and gardens. And the second is element of a peasant rural way of life. And because it didn't fit into the ideal and was associated with the dark past, the private sector was declared something that not belong in the new socialist city. So these areas are likely to be cleared and redeveloped in the near future. There were, however, some exceptions. Certain buildings were officially recognized as a historical heritage, but only those that authorities believed represented the right kind of history. Typically, these were homes of famous people, scientists, cultural figures, but most importantly, of course, for the Soviet Union, places associated with the Soviet political religion. Houses where revolutionaries had lived, had burned, married, served, exiled, plotted, or written their works. Thousands of such places were officially preserved. And this status, of course, came at a price. Because if your home was declared a heritage building, you couldn't even hammer a nail into your fence without official permission. And even today, owners of historic estates cannot repair their gates without approval from an expert commission. So this led to very strange and absurd situations, like two neighboring houses completely identical could receive very different statuses, and one was protected as a heritage and the other was considered just an old house. And the strange thing is that both of them decay at the same rate. Like, owners of the non-heritage house neglected it, knowing it would soon be demolished. And owners of the heritage house also neglected it because they couldn't do anything with it without state permission. So, over time, two key meanings became attached to the private sector. The first is association with this dark, wrong past. And the second is temporariness and marginality. The private sector was often perceived as something that in practice no longer really existed. And together with their residents, those wooden districts became suspended between past and future. Some of my respondents I talked with in Krasnoyarsk and Irkutsk, they spoke of a strange sense of temporariness, as if they had been living for decades packed and ready to go, expecting to be relocated at any time and therefore not bothering much about improving their own houses. And many residents, especially those living in decaying, dangerous housing on the outskirts, they hoped to be resettled. Their living conditions was extremely difficult. No sewage system, no running water, and no good roads. And the Soviet regime did partially succeed in its war against the private sector. A large portion of it was replaced replaced with standardized block apartments. And the Soviet regime did partially succeed in this war against the private sector, and a large portion of it was just demolished and destroyed. So, but then Soviet Union collapsed with its ideology, planning system, and linear vision of progress from the dark past to the bright, brilliant future. And suddenly, neither the past nor the future seems to matter anymore to urban elites, because they was fighting for the remnants of Soviet industrial complexes and sometimes for their own lives. And that's why people began to accept that they would have to settle down in their land permanently. Some welcomed this realization, and others found it painful, especially those who really counted to get into the new buildings, into the flats, instead of old, rotting Soviet barracks. And it also became possible to remove heritage status by bribing the right experts. In the city I'm speaking about, this typically costed around, let's say, from 60 to 50,000 baht. So this gave wealthier owners the ability to renovate, to rebuild, or even demolish protected heritage homes. And urban political regimes returned their attention to the private sector once the country recovered from the worst of its social and economic chaos. People had money again. Some could afford to buy housing, others could afford to build. And low-rise neighborhoods became attractive to big developers for two big reasons. The first, they were built of materials that burned easily. And the second, they had low population density, fewer people to resettle, fewer problems with law. Meanwhile, those living in old Soviet barracks on the outskirts were of no interest because their land wasn't valuable, and developers focused especially on central areas where land was expensive and historic buildings were concentrated. And in these areas, they encountered the highest resistance from residents who knew the real market value of their property and were emotionally and historically and financially attached to their neighborhoods. So let's turn back to the Krasnoyarsk, to the Nikolaevka district. Usually the conflicts around the redirection of meaningful past starts with media campaign. And in this case, in the public discourse, particularly in the media, the urban political regime tended to deny all layers of local history at once. The pre-revolutionary past, the Soviet legacy, and the post-Soviet local stories were all mixed and redefined with a single word, dilapidation. And city administrations and developers actively constructed a negative image of these areas using words like barracks, a disaster, worn out, drugs, dirt, and so on and so on. And to justify their position, officials created a strong association between demolition, the common good, and transcendent actor, the city itself. And of course, only they had the right to speak on this behalf. So, speaking on behalf of the city, they claimed that the city needs this building torn down. The city is aware of the need of development. Demolition is only way forward, and other same constructions. So they also invoke bodily metaphors to describe the situation. The private sector was described in classic Soviet political style as a shameful stain on the face of the city. And just like in the Soviet period, space was made into a symbol of the dark past, something that needed to be erased to allow progress towards a new urban utopia. And this new utopia was often imagined in similar ways to the idealized socialist cities of the past. After defining the target area as a decaying periphery, speakers representing the urban political regime shift their focus from space to people. And they using phrases like people with no real prospects, citizens lacking privilege, and others. And using these phrases, they claimed that the residents of these neighborhoods are the same, like they're poor and collapsing estate, that they too were worn out and backward. And this association between a deviant place and deviant population served to devalue any protest coming from these local communities. And opposition voices were dismissed in advance as not worthy of public discussion, of public attention. And on the level of practice, my respondents used military metaphor to describe what was happening there. They spoke of siege, of war, of front. And like, for example, one of my respondents tells me the story how developers would send an excavators to demolish houses while the residents were at work crushing everything in sight. And after that, people spent years trying to punish developers in courts, and courts justify this kind of actions. And meanwhile, agents representing the developers, sometimes pretending to be municipal employees, they would roam the district. They looked for elderly people living alone, tried to intimidate them or trick them into selling their homes and land for just a small fraction of a real, actual market value. And of course, fires would frequently break out, almost a trademark of redevelopment campaigns in Siberian cities. Homes of the most stubborn residents or of those who didn't privatize the land under their houses, they often went up with flames. In Irkutsk, I spoke with people whose houses caught by fire while they were there with their children. And in one district, a multi-unit wooden Soviet building was caught caught fire at night, and the front door has been blocked from the outside, and residents had to jump from the windows to escape. And the activation of the past and its redefinition as dilapidation creates a kind of magical rupture, because declaring the past unacceptable effectively removes the space and its people from the realm of normalcy, and property rights stop functioning there. Claims to fair compensation are dismissed as greedy or unreasonable. And the residents responded the city regime in several ways. Some of them activated horizontal networks, social ties that connected them to the parts of the political regime. For example, if some of my respondents had some connections with the prosecutor house, with the police, or with some deputies, of course they not only used these connections by themselves, trying at least to improve the sum of compensation, but they shared this social capital with their neighbors. And this didn't eliminate the threat of demolition, but it slowed down the process and increased compensation, which at first was so low, and that it wouldn't even buy a one-bedroom apartment on the city periphery. Another strategy which caught media attention but unfortunately didn't lead to victory was the attempt to redefine the neighborhood's meaning from decay to heritage. And instead of dilapidation and backwardness, the area was reframed in terms like ecological value, peace and calm, unique local practices, and so on. So the locals tried to share these narratives with media, and sometimes media take them and spread them, but unfortunately it doesn't work, especially in Krasnoyarsk. And yes, those personal stories were easily dismissed by the local political regimes, and developers blinded the public with glossy computer generation visions of the future garden city, promising universal benefit for them. And local memory, if acknowledged at all, it was framed as a necessary sacrifice in the name of this bright and beautiful future. So let me turn to the Irkutsk example. The district I will discuss is located in the very heart of Irkutsk historical center. On one side, it borders dense urban construction, administrative and residential buildings. On the other, the central park. Before the revolution, this area was a cemetery, and afterwards, an amusement park was built directly on the top of it without removing the gravestones. Old graves and monuments stood alongside a small zoo, barbecue stalls, and children's ride park called Cipollino. And the next of the cemetery stood a church. After the revolution, it was converted into the ski rental station. And following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the area acquired a new and powerful neighbor, a large open-air market. And both local and migrant vendors began to bring some goods from China and ex-Soviet countries to the market, literally saving the population from hunger in early 1990s. And the district became a part of the market economy's orbit. Houses and estates were rented out for some parts of open market infrastructure, like shipping containers, illegal dormitories, and some cafes, some food court. And for nearly 20 years, this space was vibrant and dense with human life, shaped by this post-Soviet goods market. And the conflict in this area began once again with a media campaign initiated by the urban regime, declaring the current state of the area and its residents unacceptable. The district was now associated with the market, and the markets were the tumor of the face of the city. Rhetorically, there was some unique features. First, the colonizers began to recognizing the value of one historical layer, the pre-revolutionary one, while completely rejecting all others. And second, when Irkutsk's new urban aristocracy set out to reclaim the center from poor and middle-class residents, they adopted a narrative created by the Orthodox Church, a rhetoric of deproletarization. And this meant a symbolic rejection of Soviet era, like former revolutionary heroes became terrorists, Soviet monuments were declared as inappropriate, and working class housing was reframed as filthy slums. And this narrative, of course, affected the people living here, many of whom had inherited their homes from the Soviet period. And the new elite viewed them as a second-class wanderers. And the market, symbol of the post-Soviet period, was mixed together with the Soviet-era barracks, poverty, and dirt into one narrative of urban degeneracy. In response, the authorities presented a new urban utopia, one built largely on glorification of the pre-revolutionary past. You can see it on the second picture. And of course, this utopia was drawn on the graphic app as other same utopias. And having declared that this area was historically a merchant district, the urban regime undertook to return everything to its rightful place, to cleanse the center of poverty and the pitiful belongings of the poor. And the goal was to turn the district from a residential zone into a place of elite consumption, where well-off, respectable gentlemen of the future would feel proud to go. In all other respects, the rhetoric remained the same. Residents were portrayed in media as dirty, poor, and barbaric, as people who offended the eyes of the city's elite by digging around the mud in their garden plots. And it was claimed that locals resisted only because they failed to understand their good fortune, their benefits. Once kicked out from their humble wooden homes in the center to tiny apartments on the outskirts of the city, they would eventually realize how lucky they actually were. As in Krasnoyarsk, the authorities considered that reality was to blame for the mismatch between beautiful utopian 3D pictures and reality. So, fires happened in Irkutsk too. And residents had to jump out of windows in the middle of the night, and they organized patrols to catch some nighttime intruders, the agents of this bright future armed with Molotov cocktails. And this happened especially often when the land underneath the buildings was not privatized, or if the house had protected status of a heritage, and burning it was easier than complying with all preservation laws. But there was some important symbolic differences. As I told before, the Orthodox Church claimed her rights to the symbolic part of the city. And for example, they claimed the rights over the former cemetery and temple building. Under pressure from the church, the Cipollino amusement park, the barbecue stalls, and the zoo were eventually shut down without resistance, but still not without resistance. And gravestones buried again under the layers of garbage were executed again, and several particularly revolutionary street names was changed. The ski base was removed from the church. The bell tower, previously destroyed, was rebuilt. So the monument of revolutionary fighters in the front of the church was quietly taken down. And we can say that there was too much history there in this area. The center of Irkutsk had been inconveniently recognized as a part of UNESCO preliminary list at that moment, so the urban regime couldn't just simply pretend there was no history at all, as the Krasnoyarsk regime did, demolish everything and burn it all down like in Nikolaevka. And as well, we can say that there was some enthusiastic people inside of the local elites who supported the idea that the past represented by the architecture is something valuable. So instead, the local political regime in Irkutsk expressed deep concern about the poor state of these wooden houses, claiming they were important for collective memory, but at the same time, they declared that the local population was too poor and too wild to maintain them properly. So the real plan was to gut the district, to expel the wrong people, eliminate the wrong practices, and remove the old rotting logs nobody cared about, and replace all of this with restaurants, boutiques, plastic and glass buildings that would look almost like historical architecture. So here we can see some examples of this the brave new world. And well, so historic buildings were declared dilapidated, and this status justified the resettlement for them. Respondents told me that in one case, about 15 houses in a similar districts which had undergone major renovation were all declared dilapidated in a single day. Once that status was assigned, the houses were handed over to a municipal agency, and that agency then started auctions formally through which the houses were passed to investors. And of course, those investors was affiliated with the city administration. And this made it possible to acquire like about 2,000 square meters of land with a two-story wooden house. Right in the downtown of the city of 600,000 people live just for 1 million baht. And under the condition that the buyer would restore it. And of course, the same municipal organization was in charge of approving the quality of this restoration. And as a result, restoration costs were often far lower than was officially required. And after this fake restoration, the investor would pay about 60,000 baht to an expert commission. And this commission would declare that the houses no longer had a historical value. So then it could be legally demolished. In some cases, a shopping mall would be built on the spot. If the house attracted too much attention from the media or from local communities, the mall could be constructed just a few meters away, while the old house was kept as a symbolic facade of this. And in essence, historical disputes once again marked the emergence of a frontier situation in which local communities were almost guaranteed to lose. And my respondents said they repeatedly lost court cases against developers and the city administration. However, there was one very important exception. One respondent described a strategy that allowed a small community to defend itself even though the attack was led by the mayor himself, who had close ties to a developer company. So this strategy included, first, open street protests, including solo pickets, but while carefully avoiding political slogans, only social slogans. The second step was use horizontal networks, the personal and informal connections, to get partial support from within the political regime. And the third, and I think one of the most important parts, is shifting the narrative. Instead of using personal memories like in Nikolaevka and Krasnoyarsk, locals linked to linked the district to another layer of collective memory, one that still mattered to part of the local elite. Specifically, activists created a symbolic association between their neighborhood and the heroic image of Soviet hydroelectric dam workers who had once lived there. And that image resonated with the agenda, with the narrative used by a Russian Communist Party, which continues to exploit the idea of a heroic Soviet past and still holds some influence both at federal and local level. And the party used this story to gain political points, and with their support, residents won. They secured legal recognition of their homes as heritage sites linked to the Soviet past. In this way, the historical weapon of the urban regime was turned against itself. In conclusion, I want to say that unfortunately this case is likely an exception in Irkutsk and Krasnoyarsk. Yes, it shows that a new political actor is beginning to appear in Russian cities, one that is able to play the game of this kind of memory politics. But the actor remains weak, and its victories depend primarily on the ability to mobilize the horizontal networks. And these networks, not public discourse, not the law, are what allow one version of the past to temporarily win. For the urban regime, memory is not about heritage in Siberia. It is a source of rent redistributed between bureaucrats, developers, and some loyal experts, and of course some force agencies. And this comes at the expense of the urban poor and the middle class, who face the fate once reserved for the colonized northern territories of the Russian Empire. The humanization, and forced removal to the margins, to the periphery. And to legitimize this process, the regime reuses the fragments of Soviet and imperial expansionist narratives, those same stories that were once used to justify conquest. And for me, the strangest thing in this story is that how easily both urban regime and local communities reproduce the Soviet narrative, justifying the sacrifice of personal memories, the personal wealth, in the name of this new imagined utopia made in graphic apps. And even those who struggled, even those my respondents who tried to fight with the local regime, they did not do that to stop this process. They just tried to improve the size of compensation. So it seems for me that they stay at frontier for too long, and for so long that they don't imagine a world without this uncertainty. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'll try to answer your questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajahn Dmitry. And now we open it to the floor. There'll be mics coming round, so please let us know you want to ask a question, and we'll bring a mic to you.
Thank you. I liked your lecture very much. Very interesting. And I hope this is working. I just want to ask if this same dynamic is observed in Moscow as well as in rural area, in remote areas.
Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I don't have enough data to speak fluently about Moscow, but my guess is that the same kind of processes are running out of all Russia, because we have a lot of laws that make this situation of demolishing very comfortable for the city political regimes in every part of Russia. So I believe that, yes, it happens in Moscow, it happens in Yekaterinburg, in eastern and western parts.
Why did you grow up?
Excuse me?
Where did you grow up? In Irkutsk?
Yes. Yep.
Actually, I want to ask a question. Ajahn, as far as you're aware, have ever any criminal prosecutions been brought against people who were found to have blocked the doors so that the house would go up in fire and then they could replace with whatever? Have ever any criminal prosecutions been instigated?
I can't remember a single case, but I know about the cases where the criminal prosecutions was started against the people who tried to struggle the political regime. Like, for example, in Krasnoyarsk, there was a lawyer who helped the local communities to improve the sum of compensation, and he was prosecuted, and now he's in jail for that. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for speaking. I'd like to ask, because this is, you primarily concerned about like how the Soviet Union back during while those revolutionaries and their lingering effect in modern Russia and development. Do you think there would be similar situations of struggles between trying to preserve a heritage site versus having modern developments in other post-Soviet nations, such as, say, Belarus, Kazakhstan, etc.?
That's a great question, but unfortunately I'm not, I don't feel competent enough to to talk about that. I have no data at all. I'm sorry.
Well, I wonder why you chose Siberia, for this kind of issue. Why there? Because, like Vladivostok, which is far, far away from, the capital centers of Russia, could have been more interesting.
Yes, that's true. Thank you for the question. And I'll say that that's a kind of specific of Siberian cities. We still have a huge districts covered by this kind of houses. This kind of houses, and so that's the main reason.
I see. So you know nothing about things like this happening in Vladivostok?
No, only about those two cities.
Only these
Yes.
two cities?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Thank you. I asked this question because I am a Korean sharing the territory right there with Russia.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your talk so much. And I have a question about, actually I would like to share that there are some cases in other towns that the residents were forced to leave their neighborhood as well with fire and things like this. And in some cases, the civil society organization or the group of people who care about heritage, maybe they also come out and voice out and try to stop it. I would like to know, in your case, are there any groups like that in Irkutsk or in your in this town to trying to help to protect this neighborhood or not? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good question as well. Well, there are some human rights activists who are trying to participate this fights, but it's very complicated in nowadays Russia to be a human rights activist. So, and it happens in Moscow more often. It happens in the western part of Russia because the big universities are concentrated there, and how to say, the grassroots societies, the grassroots civil activity are more developed there. But in Siberia, I know some local activists who use their social capital to help the locals. Like, for example, one lady created an informal group, and she was a judge in Soviet Union, and she still has some connections with the courts, and she used her experience, her knowledge to support the locals in the court and the prosecution process, and she succeeds because he can rely on the partially support of the Communist Party I told about her. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just advocating a bit for Moscow. Outside of Moscow, there's a Город Писателей. There's a small village with such houses where under the Soviet regime, authors lived there who wrote children books or even poetry, and this is pretty well preserved. So it's not all going bad. I mean, I'm not Russian, but I lived many years in Moscow. So some parts are preserved, and they want to keep alive the cultural heritage. To your point, of course, not every wooden house will survive, will get this attention and funding, but yeah. So in Moscow, some areas, it's a bit working.
Yes, of course, that's true, and it works sometimes even in Siberian cities. But I think, and I don't know how it works like in Moscow, but in Irkutsk and Krasnoyarsk, the question is the local developer interested in this particular area? So that changed the rule of the game dramatically, and that's the case. So I think maybe in Moscow, public attention still can protect some of these areas. But yes, of course, not all of the wooden districts are facing this kind of fate. Yep. Thank you.
Is that one last question?
Sure, I can ask a question. So you're describing a post-Soviet dynamic where economic pressures are driving what's happening. Is that right? And in Soviet times, what was the picture like? Obviously, the government wanted to reclaim certain areas for its projects. Would we observe the same dynamic at that time?
Thank you so much for the question. The answer on the first question is yes, and the answer on the second question is, as I know, dynamics was different, and I can talk only about the latest Soviet Union, and I know that the expert communities was more independent in that period, and for example, those crucial protecting heritage laws was created by the expert communities to protect at least a small part of the remnants of the old pre-revolutionary cities, because this rhetoric of progress was so powerful in Soviet cities, and the political regime in those cities tried to demolish everything and recover it, replace it with those huge modernist constructions. So experts tried to fight with this process, and they succeed. And now we have their heritage in this laws protecting nowadays wooden buildings. Yep. Thank you.
If there are no more questions, then all that remains is for me to thank Dr. Dmitry Timoshkin for a very informative and a presentation from the heart. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.